Welcome to the Your Courageous Life podcast, where we explore what it really means to transform fear, burnout, and perfectionism with the practice of courage. I'm Kate, author of the books 100% Fully Alive and The Courage Habit, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and head of the CLCC Coach Training Program at TeamCLCC.com. If you're someone who feels deeply, thinks critically, and wants to stay grounded in a world that can feel like too much, then this is the podcast for you. Learn evidence-based and heart-centered tools to practice courage so that who you are on the inside becomes how you live, lead, and show up on the outside. And now, let's get into today's episode. All right, gather ye round, overthinkers, because I have a feeling you might know what this feels like. Let's just say that it's like 11:47 p.m. and you have somewhere to be at 8 a.m. tomorrow. But instead of sleeping, in your head, you are replaying a text message that you sent hours ago. You're asking yourself if it had the right tone. You're wondering if the exclamation point read as like fake enthusiasm, or you're wondering if it came across as cold. You're like drafting in your head different versions of a follow-up message that you might send that honestly you probably are never going to send. Or maybe it's less about a text message. Maybe mentally you're laying in bed trying to get to sleep because you got to get up tomorrow, but mentally you're back at your desk hours after you left the office replaying something that your manager said to you in passing. Let's circle back on that. And now you've built an entire narrative around those words. Like, am I in trouble? Did that mean something? Should I have responded differently in the meeting? You're mentally rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened yet with a person who has no idea that they are currently the star of your evening, that they are with you in bed. Or maybe what you're thinking about, what's on your mind as you're trying to go to sleep, knowing that you need to get up the next day. Man, that is a tough place to be when you got to get up early in the morning, but your brain is like, I'm going to pick now to have you think about these things. Maybe it's a decision. Do I take the job? Do I have the conversation with my family member about what they said at Thanksgiving? Should I say something about blah, 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 blah to my partner because it's been bugging me? And you've spent the better part of a few hours now running through every possible version of how it could go. The version where it goes well, which you probably don't spend as much time on, the version where it could go badly, the 5 different versions of somehow it goes badly. And you're basically going through this conversation, thinking about something that might not even happen the way you're thinking it will happen right now, who is probably off at their house sleeping really well. Unaware that maybe you are fighting with them in your head or planning to bring something up with them in your head. And somewhere in the middle of all that, when you're laying in bed and you got to get up in the morning and your brain is like, now is the moment when we have to think about all the things, riding on the back of that, you probably are thinking, what is wrong with me that I can't just stop thinking about this and go to sleep? So if any part of what I just described felt familiar, the loop of it all, the rehearsal of what may or may not happen, the exhaustion of a mind that will not just like clock out, go to bed. There are a couple things I want you to know before we go any further. 1, you're not alone in this, not even a little. If I can describe this to you, girl, it's because I've been there. This is one of the most common experiences I hear about when I'm working with my one-on-one clients, full stop. 2, the story, the narrative that you're telling yourself about what this means about you is very likely wrong. And today, we're going to spend this episode taking that story apart. Now, I do want to say one thing before we go any further. Sometimes what people label as overthinking does have a biological basis. OCD. ADHD, diagnosable clinical anxiety, not just the kind of colloquial, I have anxiety, but like actual diagnosable anxiety. And so if that is a pattern that is interfering with your ability to function day to day, with your sleep on such a chronic basis that you're not getting enough sleep, with your work, your relationships, of course, please consult a mental health professional. Talk to a therapist, talk to a doctor. What I'm going to talk about today is the everyday experience of a busy mind that is overthinking a lot of things. I'm not talking today about a diagnosis, and I'm certainly not talking today about a substitute for professional support if you need it. So here's where we're headed today. 3 things. First, I'm going to talk about and help you look at what overthinking is actually doing for you. Because for as much as it's a pain in the ass when you're trying to go to bed, and that's the moment when your brain is like, here's 10 things that we can think about, it's doing something for you even when it doesn't feel like it. Second, we're going to talk about a mislabeling problem. Because I actually think that some of you who are calling yourselves overthinkers are doing something else entirely, and calling it a flaw might actually be causing you some stress that you don't really need to feel. And I don't really ever hear anyone talking about this. And third, we're going to talk about the line that should not be crossed. The moment when the thinking stops being useful and starts being a trap, and what to do about it. Because that's really the part that you want some help with. I'm guessing from one overthinker to another. Okay? So, first thing, I want to plant a reframe really, really early on. I think it's like the spine or shape of this whole episode. Overthinking is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that your brain is actually trying in an outdated and exhausting way, unfortunately, to protect you. So there's not something wrong with you. You're overthinking in a way to try to protect yourself. And there's research behind this. This is not just like a self-help language kind of thing. I found this idea that's called the avoidance theory of worry. This psychologist, Thomas Borkovec, Borkovec, and colleagues, And one of the more surprising findings to come out of that research when I was looking through it is that people who worry heavily don't often experience it as pointless. They experience it as useful. And if you think about it for a moment, if you take it out of when it's 11:47 p.m. and you got to get up early the next morning, when you're not tired, when you're not exhausted, when you're not trying to sleep, it actually can feel like preparation. It can feel like problem solving. It might even feel for you like motivation to get something right, or a way to prevent something bad from happening, or a way to soften the blow if the bad thing does happen. So your brain isn't so much malfunctioning when you go there. It's executing a strategy. And that strategy is based on an assumption, a story that maybe you've never even thought of, maybe you need to question. And the story is, if I can think through every possible bad outcome in advance, I will be ready, and readiness will keep me safe. Now, I can really relate to this. I have talked in recent podcast episodes about the fact that my father died. My dad was a lifelong smoker. Congestive heart failure issues run in my family. I was so prepared. Let me tell you all, I was so prepared for lung cancer or a heart attack. I overthought that. I thought about what would I do if he had a stroke and had to go into assisted living? How would I handle it if he had lung cancer? I was really honestly convinced lung cancer was going to be the thing because he had emphysema already. And like I said, he was easily a pack-a-day smoker. And I will insert into this as well. If you are a smoker, I am here to tell you now, you do not want to go out that way. It's not good. Don't do it. Stop smoking. Do what you need to do to stop smoking. Okay, off my soapbox. You know what I didn't think about? Him falling at home and laying on the floor for so long that it would cause him to go into rhabdomyolysis, sepsis, and then his kidneys to fail. His kidneys never once crossed my mind, ever. So the story, you know what, I'm going to think through all the possible ways that this could go, and then I'll be ready, did not apply here. Did not apply here. So I just want to point this out, that it's like understandable that our brains would go to this place of overthinking to try to protect ourselves, to try to be ready. But it's also worth noticing that it doesn't always work out that way. Now, there's this related body of work that I was looking at. It's called the Intolerance of Uncertainty model, developed by Michel Dugas, D-U-G-A-S. This is coming from late 90s. This is all theory, right? But that research actually found that the people who struggle the most with excessive worry are not people who cannot tolerate bad outcomes. They can tolerate the bad outcomes. They're people who can't tolerate not knowing. The uncertainty itself is the hardest part. And I recently did a video on social media where I said, hey, overthinkers, instead of asking yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Ask yourself, what will I do if it does? And I stated in the video, I bet there are going to be people who are going to be like, oh no, that's actually a worse question for me. And I totally got comments where people said that. But this is what I was actually thinking of when I said, instead of going, what's the worst that can happen? Ask yourself, what will I do if it does? Because what's the worst that can happen will constantly put you in uncertainty. But what will I do if it does happen puts you in a place where you can go, here's how I'll handle it. So overthinking is really the mind's attempt to manufacture a feeling of certainty in a situation that is by nature uncertain. I, with my dad, was trying to manufacture certainty and feel like I would know all the things if he died in the way I expected him to die in a situation that was fundamentally uncertain. You can't actually know how life is going to go. You can't know how the conversation is going to go. You can't know what your manager meant when they said, let's circle back. You can't know. You just don't know. We don't know. So there's kind of a gap there that I guess the mind is trying to fill. The mind is just doing what it knows how to do with that discomfort. Let's generate more scenarios as if that'll add up to certainty. And they won't. And that's the part nobody tells you. Your brain doesn't know that yet. Your brain's operating on an old assumption that more thinking equals more safety. So I invite you to just sit with that reframe for a second. The reframe being that you think that you overthinking things is going to give you more certainty, and in fact, it doesn't. It is a strategy. It is tiring. But it's not a flaw. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be the person who lies awake at 11:47 p.m. when you have to get up the next morning, running scenarios. Somewhere along the way, maybe in a chaotic household, a job where you got caught off guard by a layoff, or there were real consequences where you weren't paying attention to something perfectly. Maybe in a relationship where you learned that, hey, if I can anticipate what kind of mood they'll be in, I'll be okay. Somehow along the way, you probably learned that vigilance pays off. And your mind is just going to keep going back to that, even in situations where the stakes are nowhere near where they used to be. And overthinking is something that I look at a lot in my own life. It's because really the overthinking, when it starts to get parasitic, it really becomes a place where self-doubt and fear start to amplify. So when I'm working with a client, it's like, how do I help you to notice the places where you're overthinking? And it stops becoming a strategy that's about preparedness and becomes a strategy trying to get you certainty where you just aren't going to get certainty. Now, here's another thing. And this is the thing that I was referring to earlier when I said I don't think people talk about this as much. Not all of you are actually overthinking. Yeah, some of you might not be overthinking. Not everyone who thinks they're overthinking is actually overthinking. Some of you are actually just processing complexity. You think in layers. You have high integrative complexity. You're someone who notices the thing under the thing, the subtext in the conversation, the second order consequence of a decision, the way three seemingly unrelated things actually connect. And as somebody who is in this category, it blew my mind to learn that not everyone is that way. Like, not everyone is listening to the subtext in a conversation when they talk to someone. What? Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's true. Some people in the world actually just have a conversation and just take people based on what they say. Or some people in the world, 3 different seemingly unrelated events can happen and they're just like, that's random. I really did not know that it worked that way. I really was like, really? People don't see that these things are connected? No, it's actually that way. So some people just process complexity in a different way. And I am here to say, I don't think that's a malfunction. I think it's a genuine cognitive strength. And so instead of naming it as a strength in our pop psychology culture, a lot of you have been diagnosing yourselves with overthinking, treating it as if it was something wrong with you when it's really a form of depth. Now, again, this can go in a negative direction. When you're laying in bed late at night, you got to get up the next day. I don't think that that is the healthy form of what I'm talking about here. I think that's overthinking. But there are other times, again, like the pattern recognition or the noticing of the thing under the thing under the thing, that is just processing complexity, thinking in layers. And there was, again, coming from the 90s. I loved the 90s. It was a great decade. So maybe that's why so much of today is coming from the 90s. But there are these psychologists, Paul Trapnell and Jennifer Campbell, who wrote about this, about the difference between rumination and reflection. The difference between rumination and reflection. Rumination is thinking driven by threat, a sense that something is wrong, unresolved, unsafe, and you better keep circling back and circling back and circling back, and the circling back becomes a way to try to manage that feeling. Reflection is thinking driven by curiosity. It's a desire to understand what's going on, understand yourself, understand other people, understand your life more fully. Now, from the outside, and honestly, sometimes from the inside, these things can look almost identical. Someone just sitting quietly, staring into space, you're in your head, but the internal experience is completely different. And hopefully, as I'm laying this out, you're like, oh, okay. Because one of them, the rumination, it's driven by fear and self-doubt, and it's anxiously circling a situation. But reflection is the processing of complexity and thinking in layers and noticing the patterns and the subtext. That's exploration. Here's why this distinction matters so much. If you are actually a reflective processor, or someone with high integrative complexity, and you've spent years calling that overthinking and treating it as a problem to solve, you've been fighting yourself. You've been trying to suppress what is actually a strength because it got mislabeled early on, maybe by a parent who said you think too much, or a partner who got impatient with how long you were taking to make decisions, or maybe just by a culture that prioritizes someone being decisive and uncomplicated, and sometimes I think treats depth and critical thinking of thought as a liability. Now, I want to be really specific about how to tell the difference because I don't just want to leave you with a concept. Ask yourself, when I'm in this thought pattern, am I circling the same 3 or 4 fears without any new information entering the picture? Or am I actually building understanding layer by layer? Am I contemplating? Am I arriving somewhere new? Rumination tends to be a loop. Reflection tends to be, oh, yeah, maybe it could be this, but I don't know. If we went that way, it could be that. New possibility here. Could try this out over here. Very different energetically. Very different energetically. So if each pass is teaching you something, shifting your understanding even slightly, that's reflection, and it deserves respect, not shame, not, oh my God, I'm such an overthinker. So, gotta know the difference. And knowing the difference is basically most of the battle because there's a line. There's a place where thinking stops preparing you and starts freezing you. So if overthinking is sometimes a safety strategy and sometimes just mislabeled, even when it's actually depth and critical thinking, when is it actually a problem? Well, this is the piece that I think matters the most because it's the one that gets missed most often in the generic advice about overthinking. The problem is never the amount of thinking. Plenty of people think a lot. They function beautifully. The problem is really what the thinking does or does not turn into. So rumination doesn't just feel bad. It actually impairs problem solving. People who are caught in rumination are generating fewer effective solutions to their actual problems, not more. That's, of course, the opposite of what the thinking, all that overthinking is promising to deliver. You think you're in preparation mode. You think you're problem solving or getting ahead of things. But past a certain point, it's doing the reverse. It just, again, it keeps you circling. It keeps you circling. So here's the line stated as simply as I can possibly put it. Preparation has a destination. Preparation has a destination. It will turn into a decision, a sent message, a scheduled conversation, a boundary you actually hold, an action, some kind of action, even a small one. And I really think that this is one of the biggest gifts that coaching brings for people, is that rumination is often what people are caught in when they're on their own. And coaching by nature says, okay, we're going to take all of that and we're going to distill from it what is actually at the heart of this, what's driving you in this moment, and what is it you want to do with all the stuff that's coming up? Is it time to have the conversation? Is it time to have the boundary? You get the support around translating so that it's not just, here's a bunch of stuff I'm thinking, and it circles over and over. Overthinking in its unhelpful form does not have a destination. You just circle over and over and over. So you can ask yourself this really simple question. Is this thought just going again and again, or am I moving towards something? Is this thought moving me towards something, or am I just circling over and over and over? And I'm a big examples person. I think it's a great way to learn. Research backs this up, by the way, in instructional design. Because I love to do some research, and I have quite a little brain that loves to read things, and then I can never remember the titles or the authors of what I read. I tend to remember the takeaways and then not where I got it from, which is, I guess, how my brain categorizes things. But I really want to give you something so that you're not just nodding along and saying, yeah, that sounds good, but still not recognizing it in your life. Let's say you hate your job and you're trying to decide whether or not to leave your job. Preparation would look like, what are my values? Are they being honored here? Listing out what's not working. Researching what other possibilities are out there. Having an honest conversation with a mentor. Doing something specific to address the issues that you're having at your specific job. Maybe even giving yourself a deadline, like a decision date. Each of those moves you somewhere. Overthinking would look like replaying the same complaints about your job every single night over and over and over without doing anything about it. No more information is coming in. You're just in the loop. And I really do want to name too that there's a safety here. Again, why do people go into overthinking? Because it feels like you're getting towards certainty in a fundamentally uncertain situation. Staying in the overthinking loop can feel paradoxically safer than reaching a conclusion, because as long as you're still thinking about it, you haven't had to take an action and potentially make a mistake, be wrong, be judged. The moment you decide and you take an action, that feels more vulnerable. So it feels safer on some level for your mind to keep circling, because you're circling around and around feels like control, but it's really just a delay dressed up as control. And you're frozen when you're just circling over and over. That's the true cost of it. You're like losing days, minutes, life. Okay? That's the cost. That's the cost. You're thinking, and you're substituting that for living. Now, I can tie this actually to something from The Courage Habit. The Courage Habit is my book. There's a framework for how you actually create courage as a habit. And it's this piece of the Courage Habit that is about listening without attachment. And I want to be really clear about what that step is not, because it does get misunderstood. It is not silencing your critic or silencing your mind. It is not some spiritual bypass where you're supposed to arrive at like a blank, thought-free state through sheer willpower and then feel like a failure when your mind predictably keeps going. The part of you that's generating all this, the scenario building, the rehearsing, all the stuff, it's not your enemy. It's a part of you that has been trying in its own overworked, outdated way to keep you safe this entire time. And this really matters, that even when this inner voice is loud, when it is in fact an inner critic, when it feels exhausting, you don't abuse it back. You don't go to war with your own mind, because that is just going to add a second layer of conflict on top of the first. So don't suppress, don't punish, listen. Like actually listen. Apply this skill of overthinking in a way that's strategic to get underneath the layers of what's going on. What is this thought trying to do for you? And do that without automatically beating up on yourself or trying to suppress yourself entirely. And I really love Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. Neff is Neff. You know, she found that people, and she's got podcasts that are out there, there are articles that are out there, just really great work on self-compassion. And one of the things that she has found in her work is that people who relate to their own difficult thoughts and inner experiences with compassion rather than harsh self-judgment actually have greater emotional resilience, and they have better ability to take action, not less. And I think often self-compassion gets labeled as like the soft or weak option that lets you off the hook. But really it's the version that gets you unstuck faster, because you're not spending half your energy fighting yourself on top of whatever the original thing is that you're trying to figure out. So let's make sure that we get this into practice, right? If you think you might be overthinking, maybe you're listening to this late at night, trying to figure out a way to calm your mind before you go to bed. When you notice the loop starting, pause and literally ask it a question. Could do it out loud, could do it in your head. What are you trying to prepare me for? What are you trying to prepare me for? And let it answer. There's usually something underneath that. I don't want to be caught off guard. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get blindsided like I was before. And you name that. You say, thank you. And genuinely, not sarcastically, thank you. And then you ask another question. What's one small action I could take that would actually prepare me instead of just thinking about it again? Sometimes the answer is real and useful. You write the actual message instead of drafting it in your head for the 9th time. I've asked myself this question before, and I find that I'm thinking of a list of things I need to do, and what's the small action I need to take? I need to get out of bed, and I need to write down the things on a Post-it note. And I find that once I do that, I usually can get back to bed. You maybe need to put the decision on the calendar with an actual date. Maybe you need to text a mentor or a friend and ask for 15 minutes of their time. Maybe there's just nothing more you need to do. Maybe it's just, I need to be willing to tolerate uncertainty because maybe the information doesn't exist yet, or the outcome isn't yours to control. But respecting yourself means set it down, not because you've resolved it, but because you've recognized, I'm not going to do anything with this tonight. That's allowed too. So, if you take one thing from today's episode, let it be this. Your mind is not broken if you are an overthinker. It is not lazy. It is not weak. You're not too much. In fact, you might be somebody who's not overthinking, but in fact, just somebody who's in a lot of depth, thinking in layers that other people just don't go there with life, with how they operate. Your mind has learned somewhere along the way that thinking hard was how you'd stay safe, or how you'd stay ahead, or how you'd avoid being caught off guard again. And that strategy might have made sense once in whatever context originally taught it to you, but you get to decide starting now, hey, I want to do this differently. I'm going to start listening. I'm going to start noticing when that strategy might not be serving me. I'm going to notice when I can just set it down. And you don't have to earn the right to stop thinking about things. You don't have to make a certain amount of progress here. You're allowed to put something down without it having to be resolved. An important thing here, though, is that the overthinking of it is not going to make it resolved anyway. That's just an illusion. Certainty is never on the table for your life, for anybody's life. And that can be really hard to reconcile. But you're going to be okay. So from one person to another who sometimes overthinks, you're going to be okay, however it turns out. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Before you go, would you take just one moment to give a rating in whatever podcast app you're listening in right now? It's a tiny action that helps to get this podcast out to more people. And I've got more for you. You can get access to free resources, audios, worksheets, and more for practicing courage in your everyday life. Head over to yourcourageouslife.com and become a subscriber, and you'll get access to an entire library of free courageous resources. And if you've ever thought about becoming a coach, or if you want to bring deeper presence and purpose to your work life so that corporate job doesn't feel quite so soul-sucking, check out the CLCC Coach Training Program at teamclcc.com. Thank you again for listening, and I hope that whatever today brings, you meet it with courage.